The room was silent, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone there thought they knew what was about to happen. One man, full of confidence and arrogance, believed he could handle anything that came his way. He had faced tough opponents before, or so he thought. But he had never faced someone like Steven Seagal. From the moment Steven entered, there was a strange calmness in the air. No loud entrance. No grand gestures. Just quiet, steady steps, a focused gaze, and an aura that demanded respect without even trying. It was almost unsettling, the kind of calm that makes you realize immediately that things are about to get serious. The arrogant man smirked, thinking he already had the upper hand. "This guy. He looks harmless," he whispered to his friend. "I could take him without even breaking a sweat." But that smirk was the first mistake, the first tiny crack in his confidence that Steven Seagal would soon shatter. As the two faced each other, the room seemed to shrink. The spectators could feel the energy shift. Everyone leaned forward, silently holding their breath, knowing something big was about to happen. The man took a step forward, ready to prove his strength, ready to show off his skills. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice full of mockery, dripping with arrogance. Steven didn't reply. He didn't need to. His eyes alone carried a message, quiet, deadly, unshakable. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a move. He simply stood there, like a calm storm waiting to hit. That silence, that presence, was already unsettling the man. The arrogance in his eyes began to falter, replaced by a flicker of doubt, but pride wouldn't let him step back. Not yet. And then the first move happened. A small, calculated action from Steven, subtle, almost unnoticeable, and yet it was enough. The arrogant man blinked, and for the first time, he realized he had misjudged his opponent. That calm, unassuming figure in front of him wasn't just skilled. He was lethal, precise, and more dangerous than anyone in that room had imagined. In that single moment, the man understood the truth. He had underestimated Steven Seagal. And he had no idea just how brutal the man standing before him really was. The crowd gasped, the energy shifted, and everything changed. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the dojo. It was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of feet and the low hum of conversation from spectators who had gathered to watch what they thought would be an ordinary sparring match. But something in the air felt different. There was a subtle tension, a pulse that made every person in the room instinctively lean in closer, as if they were already anticipating the storm that was about to unfold. The man who believed he owned the room strutted in like a king. Every step was calculated to assert dominance, every glance meant to intimidate. His muscles were taut, his posture rigid, his expression a mixture of arrogance and expectation. He had been in countless fights before, and he had defeated nearly every opponent who dared to challenge him. Today, he believed, would be no different. "Let's see who really stands out," he muttered under his breath, a smirk curling on his lips. "I'll show them all what power really looks like." He glanced at the spectators, making sure they noticed him. He flexed slightly, threw a casual wave, and boasted to those standing near him. Confidence radiated from him like heat from a fire. He was certain of victory, and that certainty would be his first mistake. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, Steven Seagal entered. There was no grand entrance, no dramatic walk or intimidating pose. Just a calm, measured step forward. He wore simple clothes, a worn jacket over plain jeans, shoes scuffed from use, hands relaxed at his sides. His eyes, however, were anything but ordinary. They were sharp, focused, and unwavering. There was no fear, no hesitation, no arrogance. Only presence. A presence so commanding that the room itself seemed to quiet in acknowledgement. At first glance, the arrogant man barely gave him a second thought. "This guy," he whispered to a friend standing nearby. "He looks like a tourist, not a fighter. Easy win." His laugh was low and dismissive, meant only for himself and those he considered his allies. But he didn't notice the slight narrowing of Steven's eyes, the subtle shift in his stance. The calmness in Steven's demeanor wasn't weakness. It was preparation, a coiled spring ready to strike. The spectators, however, sensed it immediately. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some exchanged nervous glances. A few instinctively stepped back, while others leaned forward, eager to see what would happen. Everyone could feel the tension rising, the quiet before a storm. And the arrogant man, oblivious to the warning signs, strutted closer, ready to assert dominance. "Who do you think you are?" he said loudly, almost theatrically. "You don't belong here. This is my arena, my rules. Stand aside if you know what's good for you." He laughed, the sound echoing through the room. But it was a hollow laugh. Deep down, even he could sense something was different, though he refused to acknowledge it. Pride, after all, is blind. Steven didn't respond. He didn't raise a hand, didn't mutter a single word. He simply stood there, calm and unflinching. Every muscle relaxed, every movement precise, every breath controlled. He didn't need to prove anything. His presence alone was enough to unsettle his opponent. The silence between them stretched, heavy and electric, charged with anticipation. The arrogant man shifted his weight, his impatience growing. He took another step forward, intending to intimidate, to assert himself. But with each step, Steven mirrored him subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow that anticipated every move. The tension escalated. The air seemed thicker, the room smaller, the spectators collectively holding their breath. And then came the first contact, subtle, almost unnoticeable to the untrained eye. Steven shifted his stance, a minor adjustment, and the arrogant man felt a sudden imbalance. He blinked, thinking it was nothing. But his eyes widened as he realized that Steven wasn't reacting to him. Steven was already controlling him. Every micro-movement, every small gesture, was calculated, measured, and designed to expose weakness. For the first time, doubt flickered across the arrogant man's face. His smirk faltered, his confidence wavered. But pride would not let him retreat. Not yet. He squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and prepared for a show of force he thought would intimidate Steven. What he didn't know was that he had already stepped into the trap. Steven's calm was deceptive. It was a stillness born of experience, of countless battles fought and lessons learned. He wasn't just observing. He was analyzing, predicting, and waiting for the exact moment when the arrogance of his opponent would become a liability. Every subtle glance, every shift of weight, every controlled breath was a part of a silent plan, a strategy that would soon become painfully obvious. And then the room shifted. The first real move came, a slight pivot, a subtle redirection, and the arrogant man felt it immediately. Something in him froze. Something he hadn't anticipated. That quiet, unassuming figure before him, who had seemed so harmless, was no ordinary opponent. He was lethal, precise, and utterly brutal, and the arrogant man was only just beginning to understand that fact. The spectators leaned forward instinctively. Phones were raised, eyes widened, and whispers spread like wildfire. The tension was no longer theoretical. It was real. And in that moment, the arrogant man realized he had underestimated Steven Seagal in a way he would never recover from. The arrogant man squared his shoulders, trying to regain his composure. His ego still screamed at him, "You are the strongest here. No one can touch you." But deep down, a seed of doubt had begun to grow, the kind of doubt that comes when you realize you are no longer in control. Steven Seagal didn't move a muscle at first. He simply observed, his eyes scanning every twitch, every subtle movement of the man's body. It was the calm before a storm, the moment where patience becomes a weapon. Then, almost imperceptibly, Steven shifted his weight, a subtle pivot that made the arrogant man stumble slightly. He laughed nervously, dismissing it as coincidence. But it wasn't a coincidence. Every move Steven made was calculated, measured, precise. He didn't strike immediately. He didn't need to. With a single glance and a tiny movement, he had already set the stage. The arrogant man's overconfidence was now a liability, a weakness that Steven was ready to exploit. The room held its breath. Spectators leaned forward. Some whispered to each other, "He's calm, too calm. Something is coming." Others raised their phones, sensing that they were about to witness something unforgettable. And then, the first real attack came. A subtle redirection of the man's wrist, a tiny shift that seemed harmless, and suddenly, the arrogant man was off balance. His eyes widened as he realized he had been caught in a trap. He tried to regain control, tried to assert dominance, but every movement was countered before it even began. Steven's speed was almost invisible, yet every strike was decisive, every motion brutal. The spectators gasped collectively. Some covered their mouths. Some whispered, "Did you see that?" The arrogant man's confidence began to crumble as Steven continued his measured, brutal assault, not chaotic, not wild, but precise, devastating, and unstoppable. At that moment, the audience watching at home, let me ask you, have you ever thought you could handle a situation only to realize you were completely outmatched? Pause for a moment and comment below. I want to see who has felt that shock before. The arrogant man stumbled, desperate, trying to strike back. He lunged, swung, and reached, but Steven's movements were fluid, almost like water, redirecting, neutralizing, controlling. Every attempt to dominate only made him more vulnerable. Sweat ran down his forehead. His heart raced. For the first time, fear crept in. And the crowd was silent, not out of respect, but shock. They had never seen a display like this. The subtlety of Steven's brutality was unlike anything they expected. It wasn't about brute force, it was about control, precision, and calculated impact. Every motion was a lesson, every counter a warning. Another question for you watching. If you were in the arrogant man's shoes, would you have backed down at this point, or tried to keep fighting? Comment back down, or fight. I want to see what you would do if faced with someone who is calm but deadly. The arrogant man's desperation grew. He swung harder, tried to overpower Steven, but each action was anticipated. Steven moved like he could read his mind. Every aggressive attempt met with an effortless defense and a subtle, punishing counter. The room could feel the imbalance of power. It was no longer a contest of strength, but a battle of strategy and skill. By now, the spectators were fully captivated. Phones recorded every move. Whispers turned to audible gasps. One person murmured, "I didn't think someone could be this precise, this brutal, and yet so calm." Steven's eyes remained unshaken. His calmness unnerved the arrogant man even further. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated Steven Seagal in every possible way. The subtlety, the strategy, the brutality hidden behind a calm exterior. He had no idea he was facing a master of control, and there was no escaping the lesson. The tension reached its peak. The man tried one final desperate move, and Steven countered it effortlessly, sending him staggering back. For the first time, the arrogant man's ego broke completely. He fell to his knees, gasping, humiliated, and finally aware of the gap between arrogance and skill. And as the crowd absorbed what had just happened, one last question for you. When you witness true mastery, do you feel awe or fear? Type awe or fear in the comments. I want to know how this scene makes you feel. The first clash was over, but the lesson had been delivered. Steven's calm, brutal efficiency had exposed arrogance, overconfidence, and underestimation. The message was clear. Never judge someone by their appearance, and never underestimate someone who remains silent. The room was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed, a quiet charged with shock, disbelief, and awe. The arrogant man was on his knees, breathing heavily, his confidence shattered into pieces. He had entered the arena thinking he was untouchable, but now he understood the harsh truth. He had severely underestimated Steven Seagal, and the cost of that misjudgment had been brutal. Steven stood calmly, not a bead of sweat on his brow, not a muscle trembling in tension. His eyes scanned the room, and his gaze carried a quiet intensity that made everyone instinctively step back. There was no need for words. His presence alone commanded respect. He was the eye of the storm, serene and unshakable, while chaos swirled around him. Spectators whispered among themselves, some with awe, some in disbelief. Phones had captured the movements, the fluidity, and the sheer precision of Steven's brutal, calculated actions. "Did you see that?" someone muttered. "He didn't even try to hit him hard, and yet he completely destroyed him." The arrogant man struggled to rise, but every attempt to stand was a reminder of his humiliation. His pride had been crushed in front of a crowd that now looked at him with pity, disbelief, and fascination. Some clutched their heads in amazement, trying to process what they had just witnessed. How could one man, so calm, so composed, deliver such a lesson without shouting, without chaos, without even raising his voice? For a moment, Steven looked directly at the defeated man. The message was clear. Arrogance and overconfidence are no match for skill, patience, and quiet determination. He didn't need to speak. His calmness had already delivered the point more powerfully than any lecture could. And now, audience, let me ask you, have you ever faced someone you underestimated, only to be completely shocked by their skill? Comment below. I want to see your stories of underestimation. The spectators' reactions were mixed. Some clapped slowly, hesitant at first, then louder as they absorbed the magnitude of what had just occurred. Others shook their heads, still in disbelief. "I didn't even know someone could do that," one whispered. "It's like he knew exactly what the other guy would do before he even thought it." Steven didn't boast. He didn't smile triumphantly. He simply walked forward, each step deliberate, controlled, and calm. His presence was almost magnetic. People instinctively made way, giving him space as if they were honoring the sheer power and authority radiating from him. The arrogant man, still kneeling, tried to mutter something, but his words were lost in the collective gasp of the crowd. Another question for you watching. When you see true mastery, do you feel inspired or intimidated? Type inspired or intimidated in the comments. I want to know how this moment affects you. Some spectators tried to approach the arrogant man, unsure whether to help him or just stand back in awe. The defeat was total, but it was also a lesson. The room felt the tension shift, the realization that arrogance without respect for skill can lead to total humiliation. Steven's brutal calmness had made this perfectly clear. And then came the quietest, most shocking part. Steven simply turned toward the exit, without a single word of gloating, without a trace of anger. It was as if he had merely come to observe, to teach, and now his lesson was complete. The arrogance that had filled the room moments ago had evaporated, leaving only humility, shock, and a deep respect for someone who could dominate without raising his voice. Let me ask the audience again. Would you react like the spectators, with awe and fear, or would you step in to challenge him, knowing what you know now? Comment, step in, or step back. The defeated man finally looked up, eyes wide, trembling, his chest heaving. He realized that the lesson was bigger than just the fight. It was about humility, restraint, and understanding that appearances can be deceiving. The quiet brutality of Steven Seagal was a reminder that true power is silent, controlled, and precise. Some spectators began to whisper about Steven's reputation. "I heard he's trained for decades," one said. "But seeing it in person, it's unbelievable." Another nodded, saying, "You can see why people underestimate him at first, but once you've faced him, you never forget it." And to wrap up this moment, audience, what's the most impressive skill you've seen someone display without even trying to show off? Comment below. I'd love to see your examples of quiet mastery. By the time Steven reached the door, the atmosphere had completely changed. What started as a display of arrogance and confidence had turned into a profound lesson about respect, control, and the consequences of underestimating someone with true skill. The defeated man remained on the floor, and the spectators were left with a story they would recount for years. The day someone thought they were untouchable, only to realize they had no idea who they were dealing with. The room was still buzzing with disbelief. The arrogant man was sprawled on the floor, finally beginning to comprehend what had just happened. Every ounce of his ego had been stripped away, replaced by shock and the painful clarity that he had severely underestimated Steven Seagal. And then, something happened that no one expected. Steven paused at the edge of the room, his calm gaze sweeping across the crowd. Every person felt the weight of it, not fear, exactly, but an unmistakable awareness that he was someone extraordinary. Then, almost casually, he spoke. "You've learned a lesson today, whether you wanted to or not." The room went silent again. It wasn't just the arrogance of the defeated man that had been shattered. The spectators were stunned by the combination of skill, presence, and quiet authority that Steven exuded. At that moment, audience, let me ask you, if you were in this room, would you step forward to challenge him, or quietly take the lesson and step back? Comment, challenge, or step back. The arrogant man tried to speak, his voice trembling. I didn't know. I thought I could." Steven raised a hand gently, stopping him. "That's exactly the problem," he said calmly. "Underestimating someone because of how they appear is the quickest way to get hurt." The spectators leaned forward, hanging on every word. Phones recorded, hearts raced, and whispers spread across the room. This wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson in humility, skill, and the silent power of someone who had mastered himself before mastering others. And then came the final twist, the moment that turned this from a story of defeat into a story that would be remembered forever. Steven walked slowly toward the center of the room. The defeated man's eyes widened as he realized something. This wasn't just a demonstration of skill. Steven had the kind of authority that comes from experience, reputation, and command. His calm, brutal efficiency had already spoken volumes, but now he revealed the ultimate truth. "You think you know power," Steven said, looking directly at the man, "but real power isn't in brute force or arrogance. It's in control, patience, and respect." At that moment, the spectators understood why people feared and respected Steven Seagal long before they had ever seen him. It wasn't just his martial arts mastery. It was his presence, his discipline, his ability to remain calm while demonstrating overwhelming skill. Audience, quick question here. Have you ever met someone whose calm confidence completely blew your mind? Type yes or no. I want to see how many of you have felt that shock. The defeated man finally swallowed his pride. He nodded, a mixture of respect and awe in his eyes. I understand now, he said quietly. Steven's gaze softened slightly, not in kindness, but in acknowledgement of the lesson learned. He didn't gloat. He didn't humiliate further. His presence alone was enough. It was a demonstration that true mastery doesn't need to scream to be heard. The spectators erupted into applause, slowly at first, then louder as the magnitude of the moment sank in. People whispered to each other, "I've never seen anyone do that. It's like he's untouchable, but he's calm, controlled, and precise." Another engagement question for the audience. If you had been the arrogant man, would you have apologized immediately or waited to process the lesson? Comment, apologize, or wait. As Steven turned toward the exit, the room followed his movements with awe. The lesson had been delivered, silently, brutally, and memorably. The defeated man remained kneeling, humbled, while the spectators absorbed the reality that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. And one final thought for the audience. Do you think you could ever stay calm under such pressure, or would you crack like the arrogant man? Comment, stay calm, or crack. Steven's figure receded through the doorway, leaving behind a silence filled with reflection. The arrogance had been defeated. The lesson had been learned. And everyone in that room knew, without a doubt, that underestimating someone like Steven Seagal came with consequences far greater than physical defeat. It came with the realization of one's own arrogance. The room was quiet now, but it wasn't just silence. It was the calm after a storm, the kind of stillness that follows a lesson learned the hard way. The arrogant man remained on his knees, his pride shattered, his ego in pieces. He had entered the room thinking he was untouchable, the king of the arena, and yet he had been completely undone by a man who didn't even raise his voice. Steven Seagal stood over him, calm and composed, a figure of quiet authority. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The demonstration of skill, precision, and restraint had already spoken louder than any words ever could. Every person in the room, spectators, onlookers, and the defeated man, felt it. Respect wasn't demanded. It was earned, silently, through discipline and mastery. The defeated man looked up at Steven, trembling slightly. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize." His voice cracked. There were no excuses left, no arrogance to hide behind. Only humility, raw and unfiltered. Steven's eyes softened just a fraction, not in pity, but in acknowledgement of the lesson learned. "That's exactly the problem," he said quietly. "Underestimating someone because of how they appear, that's what leads to failure. Respect isn't reserved for those who look powerful. Respect is earned, and it starts with recognizing the worth of others." Audience, let me ask you here. Have you ever had to admit you were wrong about someone? Comment below, yes or no. I want to see who has experienced this kind of humility. The spectators leaned in, silent but attentive. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a life lesson. Some whispered to each other, "I can't believe how calm he was," and yet every move was brutal. Others nodded, realizing that this moment was about more than just strength. It was about self-control, patience, and the wisdom that comes from years of discipline. Steven turned to the old clerk who had been watching quietly from the back. Unlike the arrogant man, the clerk had remained respectful, calm, and observant. Steven's gaze acknowledged that respect. "You stayed composed. You understood the lesson without needing to be taught with force. That is the mark of someone ready for responsibility. And then he made a decision that would change the course of events entirely. From today, Steven said, addressing the clerk, you are ready to lead. You have the qualities I value: patience, respect, and humility. You are the one who should guide this place forward. Audience, quick question. Do you think the clerk deserved this recognition, or would you have given him a different role? Comment, deserve, or different role. The arrogant man watched this exchange in disbelief. His shame was absolute. He realized that while he had power, it had been meaningless because it had come without respect, without awareness, and without the patience to truly understand others. Steven didn't linger. He walked toward the exit, leaving the room with the same calm that had entered it. Every step was deliberate, unhurried, and measured. The lesson had been delivered, and he didn't need to say another word. His presence alone had left a mark that would not fade. But the impact went beyond the defeated man. The spectators, the clerk, and anyone witnessing the scene now had a vivid understanding of what true mastery looked like, not just in skill, but in character. They had seen humility, precision, and controlled brutality in action, and they would carry that lesson with them for years. Audience, one more question for you. If you were the arrogant man, would you try to change after this lesson, or stay the same? Comment, change, or same. I want to see your thoughts. The arrogant man finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost reverent. Sir, I will never underestimate anyone again. I've learned more than I ever expected. Steven nodded slightly, satisfied. Good. That is the beginning of understanding. True strength isn't in winning fights. It's in knowing yourself, respecting others, and remaining calm when others are reckless. And with that, Steven walked out, leaving a room transformed. The defeated man had humility now. The clerk had newfound recognition. The spectators had awe, respect, and a story they would never forget. This wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson in discipline, humility, and the silent power of mastery. The arrogance that had entered the room was replaced with understanding, the chaos replaced by reflection, and the lesson would resonate far beyond that day. Audience, final engagement question for this part. Do you believe true power comes from force or from control? Comment, force or control. And think about it carefully. And that is the resolution. A moment that shows the difference between arrogance and true mastery, between loud confidence and quiet, controlled authority. The room had finally settled. The chaos, the tension, the shock, all had faded into a calm realization. The arrogant man had learned a lesson the hard way. The spectators, witnesses to a display of quiet, brutal mastery, had been left in awe. And Steven Seagal? He had walked out the same way he had entered, calm, composed, and utterly unshaken. But the story didn't end there. The moment carried a lesson far greater than a single defeat. It was about respect, humility, and understanding the true meaning of power. Because the harshest blows aren't always delivered with fists or force. Sometimes, the most profound lessons come silently, with precision, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who witnesses them. Audience, think about this. When was the last time you underestimated someone, and what did you learn from it? Comment below. I want to hear your stories of unexpected mastery. The arrogant man, still kneeling, had been humbled completely. Pride had been stripped away, replaced by the clarity that arrogance without understanding is dangerous. He realized that real power isn't about showing off, winning fights, or dominating others. It's about discipline, patience, and respect, not just for the strong, but for everyone, regardless of appearance or status. Steven's lesson was simple but profound. Appearances can be deceiving, arrogance is costly, and true mastery comes with self-control. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't boasted, and he hadn't needed to. His calm presence had taught a more powerful lesson than any lecture could. Audience, quick question for you. Do you think calm confidence is stronger than loud aggression? Comment, yes, or no. The clerk who had stayed respectful throughout the entire scene had been recognized, promoted, and rewarded. This was proof that humility and respect don't go unnoticed. While the arrogant man learned the hard way, the clerk's quiet composure had earned him respect and responsibility, showing that character matters as much as skill. To everyone watching, here's the takeaway. Respect isn't something you give only to those you think are powerful. It's something you show to everyone, because you never know who might have the skill, knowledge, or influence to change your life. Now, audience, another question for engagement. Do you treat everyone with respect, or only those you think deserve it? Comment, everyone, or selective. Let's see who believes in real humility. And remember, this story isn't just about Steven Seagal. It's about all of us, the choices we make, the pride we carry, and how we interact with others. The quiet lessons often speak the loudest. They leave a mark that lasts far beyond the moment. If this story inspired you, let me ask you, do you think you could stay calm under pressure like Steven? Comment yes or no, and don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button to show support. Also, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We bring you stories like this, lessons of skill, humility, and true strength, so you never miss the next moment of awe and inspiration. Audience, one last engagement question. After seeing this, what would you do differently the next time you face someone you underestimated? Comment below. I want to read your answers. The arrogant man had learned, the clerk had earned recognition, and the spectators had been given a story to remember. And the ultimate lesson. True power is quiet, controlled, and respectful. True respect is earned through humility and discipline, not arrogance or dominance. And sometimes, the person you underestimate might be the one who teaches the most important lesson of your life. So today, I challenge you. Reflect on your own arrogance. Recognize those around you who deserve respect. Learn from quiet mastery, not just loud displays. And before you leave, audience, one final reminder. Like this video if you believe humility is strength. Subscribe if you want more stories of true power. And comment your thoughts. I want to hear what lesson you take away from Steven's story. Because in life, respect isn't just a word, it's a practice. Power isn't just physical. It's in your patience, control, and understanding. And mastery isn't about showing off, it's about knowing yourself, staying calm, and teaching through action. Thank you for watching. Stay humble, stay strong, and never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes they are the most brutal.